Yeah, that's correct. I'm sorry, I, my ignorance. I thought you had a background. Thank you. Well, glad to be here. Yeah, yeah, I didn't see any AIC in your videos. Mostly, I was just entertained by the the inter-cockpit communications between you all and some of the flight performance and some of the basically the flight regimens you're trying to get yourself into and out of, that kind of thing. It's pretty good. Sure. Yeah. Okay. That's fine. Well, Creighton, if you want, I can populate a little bit more information on that run through you did, and I know that I sent my resume to you on a text, so my fat thumbs may have mistyped, but I was actually commissioned in '87, and so I may have mistyped that, but um, by '89, I was already stationed in Okinawa as the air support control officer. So air support control, one way, something that's kind of unique about it is it's called procedural control. Okay, not positive control. So when you all deal with an AWACS or a ground control intercepts, or basically people who are providing the picture, big picture for you outside the scan volume of your own radar. Um, that's called positive control. Okay, they can give you specific directions, headings, and altitudes. Procedural control is more of a flow control. We can stack, people check in. Basically, what you're doing as a fire, as an air control officer, is you're embedded in the fire support coordination center of whatever level ground component command is out there. So something that I think kind of ties all this together is every piece of marine aviation is to support one thing, and that's the trigger puller. Okay. So a Hornet is basically a flying piece of artillery, when it comes to the ground component. That's the main mission. All the other stuff above and beyond that is extra. It's what do you call them? Extra credit or electives, if you will. Okay, so Marines going to Top Gun is kind of like okay, well, you got to have a training officer, at every squadron, and so basically your pilot training officer has to go through that syllabus. But on the air support side, even though I was in the wing, you're out there with the grunts, you're digging foxholes, and you're setting up your communications equipment, and then you form what's called a fire support coordination center, which is the fixed wing, the rotary wing, the artillery, naval gunfire. If you're in and close to the littorals, obviously within range of naval gunfire. And the artillery includes down to mortars and everything. So essentially, the ground component commander, whether he's battalion, regimental, division commander, can just go to his fire support coordination center and say, I want to shift my focus from objective A to objective B. And we're right there with the radios to start pushing aircraft to the forward air controllers. So that's the last link. The fire support coordination center is that last link to the individual ground units, where embedded in there is your fire, basically your forward air controller. Okay. That went through a lot of evolution while I was in the Marine Corps. Went from Marines only to now it's like a JTAC, as they call them. Basically, all services, so they can crossbreed if they want to, but everybody's training was standardized. So that was essentially my job there, and then I had always wanted to get into aviation, but being commissioned in '87, the year before, there was this movie that came out. Okay. And yeah, and it had this guy in there, and I think he showed up, 30 years later in the same, the sequel. Well, get this, going down to a recruiter. So I was finishing up college, and I started walking into the different recruiters down, near the school. And when that first Top Gun movie came out, the waiting list just to get into the commissioning programs was, out the door and around the block. I mean, Jeez. Everybody and their mother wanted to be a fighter pilot. Okay. So you walk into the Navy and they say, well, you got to have a 3.9 GPA in, engineering or something like this, as well as pass all the physical standards. That's just to even have them look at you. Air Force was like, yeah, you got to have a 4.0 in math or engineering or something. The Marine Corps was like, hey, if you got a steady pulse and a thick neck, come on in, and so they took me, because I was just your average, I was a B student, and I wasn't going to knock anybody's socks off, with the test scores or anything like that. So ended up joining the Marines, and their waiting list, of course, was long on the aviation side, but they said, heck, we'll take you in anyway. And I said, great, sounds good. So that's where I went. So I'd always wanted to be an aviator. So all along while I'm an air support control officer, I kept dropping letters up the chain of command requesting a lateral move, and kept getting rejected every 6 months. It was like clockwork. Drop a letter, a month later get word back, we regret to inform you that due to the keen nature of the competition, you're not going to get it. That's fine. And I did that, and then we got sent over to Saudi Arabia for, the giant kitty litter box kabuki theater that goes on over there, into Desert Shield and then Desert Storm. And that was there was a lot of interesting lessons learned on that. But basically attached ourselves to the 1st Marine Division under General Wyatt, to the Fire Sport Coordination Center at the division level, where I was. A sidebar note on that, when we first got there, all the MPS shipping was offloading, okay? And we're getting fresh new equipment, unwrapping the aluminum foil off of everything, and radios, Humvees, you name it. And 7th Marine Regiment was out there, and literally this was the most fun I've had as a young lieutenant. My captain comes to me because I'm I'm a first lieutenant at the time. He goes, Lieutenant O'Donnell, get Sergeant Snyder, grab a Humvee, get some radios, and go out into the desert and find 7th Marine Regiment headquarters. And they're out there with their armored vehicles and stuff. So we went out there, and we're just a little, and I ended up grabbing one of the Lance Corporals who knew how to repair the radios, and we just went blazing out into the middle of the sands of Saudi Arabia, and we ended up finding them and linked up with them, and then setting up a little quick, communication site for them, just so we had an element of aviation represented there. Like I said, even though we're ground guys, we're part of the wing. So we're there to help integrate that. And that was fun, going out there catching scorpions and that kind of stuff, and dodging camels on the road and everything. So, but anyway, did that, and then I got back, and one of the big competition things, if you think of Top Gun for the Navy, the Marine Corps has an equivalent in the aviation world, and that's WTI. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Weapons and Tactics Instructor is a kind of the patch that you get to wear. Instead of a Top Gun patch, you wear a WTI patch.
Yeah, there was just a documentary on Fox, I think it was, right, Tex? Yeah, about WTI. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah. In fact, effectively WTI just, I think my dad asked me when I got back, he said, what do they teach you there? And I said, how to, kill people and break things with better efficiency. So, anyway, that was kind of the thing if you could get a WTI in your community, that was like sought after. Well, I was in the mix. I was in the running for it, and I ended up coming in number 2 to go to WTI, because once you become a WTI, you're now stuck back in the squadron, as in the Air Support Squadron, for at least another year, because now you're the training officer to teach all the other guys, what's the latest and greatest that WTI's teaching, all that stuff. So I was number 2, and I didn't, the commanding officer and the executive officer, they make their decision, all right, we're going to take Lieutenant so-and-so. Well, Lieutenant so-and-so decided he wanted to get married, and the wedding date was right there in the middle of WTI. And I think the XO said, all right, he's out, Pig, you're in. And so, boom, I go to WTI. While I'm at WTI, I get accepted to go to flight school. So all that time they put in all that effort to get me to go to WTI, to wear that patch, and then I leave. I got orders to get out of there. Needless to say, the commanding officer was not happy. Okay, nor was the other. So I pulled a quick one on him, and then off I go to Pensacola, and then start my journey in through T-34 Mentor, T-2 Buckeyes. We were still flying those, and the A-4 Skyhawk. Through basically that's beginner, intermediate, and advanced. And then after that, got selected for Hornets, and then off to El Toro. So that kind of fills in a lot of blanks up through 95 there.
Do you feel like?
Go ahead.
I was going to say, do you feel like that experience before you got to flight school kind of gave you any sort of advantage over maybe someone coming straight out of college or something?
As far as stick and rudder skills, as an aviator, no, because the military, as far as my experience with the Navy and the Marine Corps, all go through the same pipeline, and they don't care if you've got 13,000 hours in some kind of turboprop aircraft. They're going to start you from ground zero, and they're going to teach you the way they want you to do it, and that's that. We had some guys who had Embry-Riddle experience, some guys who had previous flight time, and they could care less. You may do that to try to get your foot in the door, and then once your foot's in the door, they're going to say, okay, everything you've learned up to this point, forget it, because it's probably not good, and we want you to learn it our way. But the only experience it did give me is a real good appreciation for how the workings, all the sausage making that goes on just to get a plane on target and talking to a forward air controller. An enormous amount of support goes in to make that happen. And so I really gained a lot of knowledge and a good appreciation on that aspect of it.
Does the A4 roll crazy fast in real life as well? We've got a sort of cheap imitation of it in DCS, and it rolls like instantly. You can knock your pilot out actually in the game by just rolling.
Yeah, one of the things on speaking of aileron, you're talking aileron rolls. Okay, yeah, the A4 Skyhawk, that little wing, that little delta wing, can roll at 720 degrees a second. And so they discouraged you from exceeding 360 degrees. Because really there's no need tactically to do greater than that. The Blue Angels and Thunderbirds, they can do all that fancy stuff. Those planes have been modified. You could not, I don't know how accurate DCS is. In the Hornet, if you start rolling aggressively at certain airspeeds, you get what's called a Dutch roll. I don't know if you're familiar with that, where your nose starts to increase a helix pattern, and then you will depart the airplane. And intentionally departing the Hornet got you a one-way visit to the general's office, and it wasn't fun.
I guess we have
For sure. We do, it is actually simulated in the Hornet there, but Hornet is a sort of official product, if you like, whereas the A4 is a sort of modded, community creation, and yeah, truly it does roll as fast as you just described.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now, whether you can knock yourself out, I don't know. Maybe if you smacked your head into the canopy on the inside or something like that. I almost took myself out, not taking myself out like that, unconscious-wise. I remember when I was early in my Hornet career, one of the things that you're doing is when you're learning defensive basic fighter maneuver, is a lot of time you're just fighting like this. You're over your shoulder, okay, looking, and that puts a lot of strain because you got this 10-pound head that suddenly becomes 50, 60 pounds. So what you end up doing is you just put the once you break away and there's no longer an infrared threat from a IR-seeking missile, you can relight your afterburner and then take your hand off the throttle, and now you put it up on the towel rack, which is one of the little handles up there, and then that's with your left hand, right hand's on the control stick, and now you turn your defensively trying to fight this guy off. And one time this guy went up, and so I'm following up, and came off the G's. My head was stuck between the headrest and the canopy. My helmet was stuck, and I'm trying to pull my head, and I can't, and because the way it got wedged up in there. So what I had to do was go back and put Max G back on the airplane, which made no tactical sense in the fight. But then I could get my head back out from underneath there, and I said, all right, I'm never doing that again. That's fine. That scared me. That got my attention. My neck was sore the next day. That's for sure.
A lot of our guys fly in VR, which at least adds that kind of strain on your neck. It doesn't quite add the G's, but it does give you a one-to-one rotation. Whereas for those of us like me or Creighton who fly on screens,
There
it's-
is a there's a meeting.
There we go. Yeah, for those of us who fly on screens, we have a bit more of a compression on that movement, so we just rotate our head a little bit. So in a BFM fight or in a BFM scenario, people like Tex are there like literally wrenching their head out, for 2 hours on end or whatever, just minus the G's.
Right.
And we
Yeah.
and we look at the edge of our monitor.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, some of the see on the DCS is pretty neat. There's some. I'm kind of impressed with some of the level of detail on even the threat. The enemy aircraft, and for example, all the stuff on MiGs and everything else out there. It's pretty impressive. It's like okay.
It's mostly because it actually comes from many years ago, like 20 plus years ago. There was another series that the original manufacturer made, which was called Lock-On, and that was actually produced with Russian aircraft in mind. Actually, was produced in Russia. So the company as it is now is basically nothing like it was before, but the original material is still there. So actually, their first aircraft were MiG-29, Su-27, Su-33, and the Eagle, and the A-10, of course.
Nice.
All right, let's go ahead and answer this first question I had. What is AMMO?
Oh, double AMO. Yeah, that's the Assistant Aircraft Maintenance Officer. So the aircraft maintenance officer answers to the CO, commanding officer, with all things related to maintenance. So basically, depending on your career path, you touch as double AMO, and then maybe you go. I remember one of our AMOs in our squadron was actually one of the test pilots for McDonnell Douglas back when McDonnell Douglas existed, and so he basically lived back in the St. Louis area, and every time a fresh Hornet came out of the factory door, he hopped in it and took it for a test spin. And so he was right there at the manufacturing level, so he got to learn a whole bunch about the maintenance required on a Hornet. So obviously he would get the head nod that, hey, that guy needs to be the maintenance officer. But really, you're just there as the officer overseeing all the enlisted effort to fix the aircraft and maintain them. Because at any squadron, you got a bunch of pilots, maybe 14 or 15 of us in a 12 aircraft squadron. 16 if you're lucky on the TO raffle, and then everybody else, all the maintenance is the enlisted. You do have some warrant officers in the critical fields, ordnance, avionics, and electronics, because of all the electronic warfare and all the stuff associated with that. And let's see who else. And then you'd have communications. So you'd have a couple of warrant officers embedded in there. Basically the Mustangs, if you will, who get up to like staff sergeant, gunnery sergeant, that type of thing. Then they go back to good old Quantico and become a warrant officer, and then back out to the fleet. So yeah, there's a lot of the knowledge of being in a squadron is not only the flying aspect part of it, but now it's also taking care of the aircraft and learning, some of the nuances of, what does a Hornet do, what typically breaks down, what is very reliable, what to watch out for, that kind of thing.
Did you ever operate off a carrier?
Only for basic certification. So when you go through flight school, you will touch the boat and you get carrier qualified in intermediate. So I did that on the T2 Buckeye, did that on the A4 Skyhawk, and then also did that on the F-18. The only time you're going to go back and touch the boat is if you're getting ready to deploy with the ship, with the big top. So when I was operations officer back at MAG 12, the Navy and Marine Corps were starting this thing called TAC Air Integration, where the one of the things that was going on is, and this is something that it's kind of, maybe it's very nuanced or overlooked, or maybe people know about it and it's common knowledge, but the Navy flies around the boat and they don't really rough up their jets very much, because it's not unusual to take off, you brief a mission, you're scheduled as a Navy Squadron Hornet pilot, hey, we're going to brief a 1v1 BFM training mission. You get launched off the catapult, take off, go out to a working airspace or working area, start your training, and all of a sudden you call bingo, and you're only one set into it. Instead of normally you can get 3 or 4 sets, you're one set in, bingo, because of winds across the deck, or ship's course, or something goes on, or hey, you just don't have the gas today, and we got pushed out to a farther working area because of something else going on. And then the next thing you do, you get on the ladder, what they call. So now you're just climbing up and you're stacking and you just hold. And you're just sitting there 220 to 250 knots. And then you're waiting to get the call to come on down and then go back to mother. So what was happening in the life cycle of the F-18 is the Navy was, every platform, airframe has a limited number of catapults, a limited number of arrested landings or traps, a limited number of G spikes, that type of thing. And what was happening is the Marine Hornets had an unlimited, remaining reserve of cats and traps because they're not touching the boat, but their poor airframes are getting, bent around and inspected, over and over, and maybe some service life extension programs are put into it. Whereas the Navy was the opposite. They had high trap and high cat and low Gs. So what they started doing was swapping airframes. So they would just take a whole block, hey, Marine Corps, here you go. Here's some new Block 15s. And we're like, oh, yeah, this is awesome. Here, you can have our old Block 11s. And then that way the Navy could cycle them through, and we were kind of basically trying to really maximize the service life of every airframe that way. Well, part of that drug deal, if you want to call it that, was, hey, if you get these new jets, because the Navy always got the cooler stuff anyway, so if you get these newer lot Hornets, we're going to ask in return that you start cycling one of your squadrons onto the boat with us. And that's where you started seeing some of the, the FA-18A++, you started seeing the old A models getting these really big upgrades so that they can get into the boat cycle of, and basically what they're trying to do is get everybody on the boat who's out flying a mission. You have the same raw gear, the same self-protect equipment, and the same weapons capabilities, and so if you just can't take a reserve A squadron and stick them on a boat and have them do the same missions that the guys who are flying, lot 17s, it's just not going to cut it. So there's, different things going on.
Well, Patrick, thank you for coming out and talking with us. My name's Ben. I'm actually trying to get into the Navy right now. Just got my packet submitted for OCS candidacy for NFO, and hopefully within the next week or two, I'll hear back if I made it or not.
Okay.
But one of the things that I do here in CSG-3 is I'm part of the 126 Seahawks, which is our the AEW of this area. We fly around in the simulated E2 and get to do a lot of AIC work on top of Cat C around the boat in ATC when we are actually on the ground simulating a dry landing. So my question to you is, how much did you work directly with those Hawkeyes and those other ground controlled interceptors to go and plan whatever it was you were doing for that day? Was it like you talked a couple weeks before, days before, hours before? Like, what did that communication between the two of you look like, both on the ground and in the air?
So you mean just before a mission type of thing?
It's up to you to
Yeah, so
translate that.
essentially, yeah. So the way to look at it is the Marine Corps has an organic AIC. It's called the Tactical Air Operations Center, TAOC. And that MOS is positive control, ground control intercept, essentially, since we don't have our own AWACS. And so what you typically would do is part of your brief is about an hour before the pilots start briefing is you get on the horn, whether that's a landline out in the desert, okay, in Saudi Arabia, or it's a telephone call like I used to make from Iwakuni, Japan to Osan, Korea, okay?
Wow.
And yeah, you get on the horn and you talk to your controller if you can. Okay, that's optimal. If you had to, they could pass it down. You brief somebody else who then would in turn pass it down. I prefer talking to my controller, and then that way you brief, hey, this is what we're going to do. You know, we're defensive counter air or we're offensive counter air, et cetera. You know, give the whole mindset, whole scheme of maneuver. But yeah, so you would typically do that that day up, but that has to be established. So let's say you come into a theater like we used to go get deployed to Thailand, and here come the Marine Hornets, here come the Air Force F-15s, here come the Singapore L-39s, here come so we got cats and dogs all jumping into
Right.
and we're going to do these large force exercises, and of course here comes AWACS. Okay, well, typically when all the training is up to a certain level, everything's standardized. I don't have to go coordinate with the AWACS guys. All I need is what frequency, here's the time on station, here's, and then when it comes time for the specific mission, or this is where it gets real fun, is when you do large force exercises. And I, as a section or division lead, can't just brief a controller because there's 83 other aircraft out in the airspace.
Right.
And so there you will get who you get, but they're briefed in on the large scale plan. And then when you get down to specifics, you could do a quick, you kind of cut up the battlefield, if you will. We call them FEZ, F-E-Z, all right, like Pez the candy, but it's FEZ. And it's fighter engagement zone. So in this lane, okay, this is so-and-so's responsibility to, here's the commit line and, all that kind of stuff. And basically get everybody up to speed. But yeah, you do communicate with them directly. So, and to me, the optimal thing is I'm getting on the horn, I'm leading a 2-ship or a 4-ship. I want to talk to the guy who I'm going to be listening to on the radio. I want to talk to him, brief what I want to do, and we clarify any, what we call comm brevity, that type of stuff, and then away we go. And then when I check in on station, I roll to the frequency, and hey, whatever his name was, Red Crown, this is War Agent 3-4 on station as frag. Like, Roger that. Picture
Gotcha.
clean. And off we go.
Very cool. It's kind of interesting to see just how everything together with Navy, Air Force, Marines all kind of ties together into that centralized air control. And it's really interesting to be, even in just the digital DCS world, to be able to talk to these individual squadrons and make everything come together into one coherent and conjoined functioning operation is really interesting. Thank you for sharing that.
Oh yeah, thanks, man.
And actually, Merlin, the red flag exercise is pretty cool for that, isn't it? Because we're all different, completely different squadrons, completely
Yeah.
different wings. So there's every 2 or 3 months there's an independent DCS group community who organize a completely cross-wing, cross-squadron or event, and they ask one squadron from each wing to, from some wings to participate. So nobody knows anybody unless they know them from YouTube or whatever. But typically it's and our guys, Merlin being one of them, do contribute to the control aspect of it as well. So it's also the sort of Navy versus Air Force and international, ICAO departures and all of that kind of stuff gets intermingled, and it's quite fascinating to be a part of, because you do have 40, 50 jets, and 6 to 8 controllers, and it gets pretty mad, and it's people who pretty much never flew together before, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, you'll find that where it gets fun, and funny story, when we got sent down to Catherine, Australia, which is in the Northern Territories, basically in the middle of the outback, 300 miles south of Darwin, and we ended up working with the Australian GCI. Okay, so you want to talk about some different communications? Not only do you got the accent to work through, but then the terminology they use is a little different. And
Right.
we were debriefing a flight. So what they say over there in Australia, single group Pepsi, 21010, 15,000. What we say in the American vernacular is, if they can discern it, they could say flight of 2 or single group, or they go heavy. Where in Australia, if it's just a group, not a heavy group, they'll say pair, flight of 2. And I remember listening to we were debriefing, and Shed O'Connor and I were on a flight, and the guy goes, Lanza, and he's in his heavy Australian accent, single group, and he does a great job. He's telling us exactly where the group is and what they're doing. And he goes, pair, and you can hear Ed over the intercom, pear, that's a fruit. I want to know if that's a flight of 2 or a flight of 4. And yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's just funny, just little things like that kind of catch it, and you're like, all right, we got to debrief that, and, so we know, brief our guys, hey, a pear is not something that's growing on a tree, it's flight of 2 enemy guys. So.
Kind of speaking to what Bloated said, getting to do this DCS red flag with some of the other guys, as a group that focuses mostly on Navy comms and the way we do positive control, where you don't have commit authority, I do, compared to the Air Force, where AWACS recommends a commit, where they have commit authority in the fighters. It's a little weird to go into these situations where we've been drilled down to our basic understanding of instinctual, what we learned, to now have to say, well, recommend commit, not commit this area. And to do that inner working with people that maybe don't know what a commit really is, going into the red flag, you have a different level of experience that people will come in on. Some people won't know how to do a carrier landing. Some of them won't know how to do proper flying, and they're in the group because it's something new they want to try. So as a controller, to that aspect, having to work with different skill levels really changes the way we have to sometimes approach things, which leads to my next question. Can you tell a difference in the experience levels of some specific squadrons when it comes to the way that they interact with other squadrons around them? And this can completely be a dig at the Air Force. If you want to get in there, I would approve it.
Well, okay, but this is something you gotta think of. I used to watch some of the F-15 squadrons do things with their intercepts that were eye-watering. Okay, the claw. Okay, and I'm not talking Jim Carrey doing that stupid Liar Liar movie. The claw. I'm talking. You put 8 Hornets line abreast, or not Hornets, 8 Eagles line abreast at about 50,000 feet, doing about Mach 1.5, okay? And they're conning, all right? They're marking, okay? Contrails galore. And so each one is a mile apart, and then each division is probably 2 miles to 3 miles apart. So you're talking, almost 12 miles.
It's a lot of airspace.
Yeah, and then the call comes in when they commit, they go claw, and they just push the stick forward, and afterburner's lit, and they come down. Okay, and it's pretty impressive looking, and it looks like two, claws coming out of the heavens, and it's like that's not something you want to see. But when they come in to pre-merge and post-merge and clean up the intercept, very well disciplined. I mean, but if you think about it, that's what their job is. Okay, the Air Force's job is to have air dominance, if you will.
Right.
If you're an Eagle, you're not going to be slinging bombs around unless you're a mud hen, okay, an F-15E. Okay, if you're a Viper, you can do both. All right, but if you're an A-10, you're not going to be doing, GCI controlled intercepts. All right, so you can start to see where the skill sets really start to refine themselves in those specific areas. And then the cool thing about the Hornet is you had to be the jack of all trades. Good at close air support, right. Good at deep interdictions, good at BFM, good at intercepts, or tried to be. So what you tended to notice, at least in the Marine Corps, was some units tended to kind of go 60-40 on their air-to-ground training versus air-to-air training, and others would go the other way. So you kind of knew amongst yourself, hey, so-and-so's in that squadron. I'm talking inner Marine here, okay? Hey, the Red Devils, those guys are good at air-to-air. The Snakes, they're good at air-to-ground, that type of thing. And when you say they're good at it, means they establish their notoriety as, hey, we want to have a good, solid game plan as close air support type. Okay, that's great. And that's all, prerogative of the commanding officer and training officer and everything. Now, inter-service, when we talk and we compare ourselves to other guys, the only guys we used to try to, rough up and beat our chest against were the Viper guys, the F-16s, because they could do both air-to-air and air-to-ground, just like we did. So now we kind of had, we start at the same level playing field is the way we look at it. So we could start comparing, apples and oranges that way, inter-service. Maybe we didn't really, the only time you really start mixing a lot up with the Navy is when you got into joint exercises up in Fallon, Nevada area. Out back then outside of Top Gun, and then Top Gun ended up moving up into the China Lake area, I believe. But yeah, or I'm sorry, I misspoke there. Back when the Navy was doing Top Gun out of Miramar, there was a lot of basically interagency, inter-service training because of the close proximity. But yeah, overall, it's very professional, very well done. I remember one time I got sent out to be, we were on a detachment here, I'm out here in Tucson. The A-10 guys. So we're out supporting, doing some air-to-ground training for the Marines, but then we're also providing red air support for the A-10s. And they want to do these visual engagements and, practice their mutual support and section maneuvering and that kind of thing. To what level? That's something that I haven't watched enough DCS to get an appreciation of, is how well is the mutual support, covering your guy's six, and wingman, you never go anywhere without a wingman type of thing. I haven't been able to pick up on that because I have to get more exposure to it to see, because some of the inner cockpit stuff, but one of the things you'll start to realize as a pilot is, what you see in front of you, like a HUD and all this stuff, and you get, you're managing your own cockpit with your weapons and everything. I'm worried about my wingman over here, who's about 1.3 miles away, and I'm keeping sight of him and making sure he's in position, and making sure nobody's trying to jump him, and listening to his status, of his raw status, and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's very, there's a lot going on there, but what you typically started comparing wasn't stick and rudder skills, okay, or who had the tightest CEP on a bombing range.
Right.
I missed the target by 8 feet, and I was 11 feet. And here comes, cooler. I missed by 300 feet. But he's a good stick and rudder guy, but he slung that one away. But what you started appreciating was other squadrons' ability to employ as a section, as a division, and how well they were mutually supportive of one another. As soon as you stuck your nose into a fight and you pick the guy out, then the next thing you know, there's a guy right on you. It's like, ah, crap. Okay, now I got to work on him. So yeah, they're watching out for each other, and that's what you started to gain an appreciation for.
Very cool. Thank you. That actually ties very similar into Nick's statement too. That is that when we look at the comparisons, at least from the people I've talked to that are in the Navy right now, doing command and control, the actual one for us is Saber Stevens. He's the commander of the 126 Seahawks for us. He's actually a JG in the military out in Virginia, and
Okay.
he teaches us a little bit about some of the way that communications work and how it sounds different when you have an E3 controlling things compared to an E2, where very much like you said in the Air Force, you'll have your individual sets of pilots that will do their single thing really, really well. But when it comes to cohesiveness, the United States Navy and the Marines working with the Navy have a lot closer inner working because we don't have the luxury of just dipping off and leaving if something goes wrong, because we're all on the same boat. So
Right.
I think you answered that pretty well to what I was kind of expecting. So thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and one of the other, and just something else, you brought up the word commit authority. We used to get into these philosophical, tactical discussions, if you will. And basically it would always come down, some of us curmudgeon old guys after a while would just say, doggone it, they either meet the commit criteria or they don't. It doesn't matter who says the word commit. If you brief us, if they come within 80 miles of this airfield, we're going after them, or whatever scenario it is. So they either meet it or they don't. Okay, and people get into the nuance. It's like, look, keep it simple for us knuckle draggers. Okay, we got enough to worry about up in the air. So they either meet it or they don't. And if they meet it, we're leaving. I don't care who you are. I'm going to commit. Then, now the fire control, like if you say, cleared to arm and fire, hostile bandit and all that type of stuff. Okay, yeah, now I can see where I got to reach my left hand up and move the master arm to arm to employ weapons. Okay, that falls under the rules of engagement. But committing on somebody is just, hey, we're going to chase them away. They come hot, they're 80 miles within the airfield, they're hot target, go at them, point our nose at them, spike them, and then they turn around and leave. It's like, okay, well, hey, GCI, AIC, monitor, please. We're going to turn our tails to them and reset the cap. And if we have to recommit, then if they meet the commit criteria. So yeah, we used to roll our eyes at some of the fun discussions. It's like, guys, just keep it simple. Makes life so much easier.
Did you fly mostly dual seat or single seat Hornets?
I have more time in the single seat than the dual, but all my red ink time was over in Iraq. That was all 2-seat, because by then I was at the wing staff, so I was flying a desk more than anything else. And so whatever squadron would roll into Al Assad, I would just go down to flight equipment, grab my gear, go drop it off with them. They check me out, everything's good, and then say, hey, please put me on the schedule. I go, of course, I'm peers with the commanding officers by then, and I'd go talk to whoever and say, hey, good to see you, welcome. If there's anything you need here at the airfield, I'll take care of you. And if you could put me on the schedule. And they were good about once a week. I used to get out of the office and go pre-flight some live AMRAAMs, Mavericks, JDAM, and Sidewinders, and lightning pods, and go raging around the desert looking for trouble. And the only time I got to employ was 5th Marine Regiment made contact with a pretty significant group, and we were doing some reconnaissance with the Lightning Pod for one of the other grunt forward air controllers, and all of a sudden we got a call from the Direct Air Support Center. They said 5th Marine contact down near Ramadi. It was actually Lake Ramadi at the time, so we had to say adios, go touch the tanker on the way there, and then I got to some unfortunate individual tried to escape and decided to swim through Lake Ramadi in and amongst the wadi. And if you're familiar with the wadis out there, you have these giant reeds that are 12, 15 feet tall. It's like a mini jungle in and amongst the water, especially near the water, the lower, the shallower water. And the poor Army guys, the Apaches, were out there trying to hunt him down, shooting flechettes at this guy, and they can't get him. They can't see him, because they're such a, and we're up top watching him. We're like, he's right there. We're trying to laser for him, but the diffusion of the laser in a wadi is just crazy, and so we got close, but basically an element of their fighting force, the enemy fighting force, fled into the water, and that wasn't the thing to do because they basically got hunted down, the old fish in a barrel type of thing. And the last remaining guy, the Apaches had the bingo, so they cleared the airspace below us, and we went in with I didn't have to use a Maverick or a JDAM or any of that. I wasn't going to waste all that money. It was like, here, just take care of it with some 20mm and mission accomplished. So,
Nice.
but,
Talk a little bit about kind of the differences of flying the single seat and the dual seat, and kind of what was your preference and kind of what was easier in the dual seat with somebody else helping you.
yeah, the single seat. Okay, so let's talk flight performance before we talk crew coordination. Flight performance. So you got this big canopy tub, as we called it, on the two-seater. So it's much longer. That creates a different pressure wave over the fuselage, okay, in and around the upper fuselage area. So if you think about it, all that air is going back in between the tails, all right? You could, at high units, high angle of attack, all right, which the Hornet thrives in, okay, very maneuverable. If you weren't careful, you could yaw that plane and it behaved differently than a single-seater, and you could depart that two-seater a little bit easier than the single-seater, and you didn't want to do that. I remember one of the old skippers of a two-seat squadron got in trouble for departing empty, and the reason was he, even though he was a skipper, he was a backseater, was and he could feel the side forces increasing, and instead of telling his young hard charger up in the front cockpit, hey, cool it, he didn't say anything, and wow, they snapped into a departure, and he got to meet the general for a one-on-one meeting. Yeah, the single-seater, basically the two performed almost identical. Your center of gravity was slightly different, only because they try to balance all that out, but it works out, pretty much the same. So you're 700 pounds lighter of fuel, which as a single seat guy you don't like, because you always want more fuel, you always want more airspeed, you always want more altitude. But slow speed flying, pretty much the same. Landing and takeoff, the same. Pretty much identical. You're really not going to notice any difference there. Where you really start to notice it is basically it's just the with that little single piece canopy on a single seater, you're just a little bit more streamlined, so you can get a little more oomph out of that plane. So yeah, the only time, twice in my career I went up and touched 50,000 feet and going faster than 1.0. I don't think I could have done that in a tub. Unless it was clean, I might have been able to. It had the EPE engines and clean configuration. I might have pulled it off, but single seater could do that. And now the crew coordination part. Essentially, the Wizzo now, you're basically sharing tasks, but you've assigned a priority. Wizzo controls the sensors, okay? The radar, the FLIR, lightning pod, whatever that may be. He's in charge of putting out the expendables for self-protection, whether that's, flares or chaff, etc. So he's good at doing that, and he can do all the talking. Up until a point where you need to come in. Like I had to butt in on that one mission I was talking about where we cornered that guy in Ramadi. The Wizzo was trying to talk the Apaches onto the target in water, which is fun, trying to grab a geographical reference point. And I said, I was watching, and I was keeping my mouth shut, being a single seat guy, and I'm going to be disciplined and good. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I said, hey, hey Spuds, let me take this for just a second. And he goes, yes, sir, go ahead. And I got on the radio, and I go, hey, war agent, whatever Apache call sign was, fly this heading. And he started flying that heading. I go, your shadow is going to pass over him, right? 3, 2, 1, now. And then like, oh, there he is, and so I did something a little unorthodox, but I'm like, fly okay, you see where your shadow is? You just drag it right over the target now. And they knew what part of, wanting to look in. So, but other than that, I think that was the only time I ever jumped in and said anything. But yeah, as a single seat guy, you got to juggle all the balls at once. So, when you're developed in that community or in that environment, and then you go into a 2-seat environment, you have to, calm down and learn how to task share. They were critical about that. You don't shed your tasks. Like, I don't drop communication. I had to listen to everything that he was saying, and everything that's coming in the plane. It was just as if I was speaking. So in case something, if he gets overcome by events, like if he says, I got to go heads down and fix this FLIR because it's acting up, then I can take the comms and take the radar and no problem, okay? So yeah, it's a little different, but it's manageable. You just have to learn how to crew coordinate, and it takes a little training and a little practice.
Yeah, we only have the single seat in VCS currently for the Hornet, so one of the things we all say, man, that there's sometimes that a D would be nice to have for, training type stuff or trying to do FAC-A. Like a lot of times you're trying to do that by yourself and it can get a little overwhelming.
Do they have a flying all officers meeting that we used to call the EA-6B Prowler? Put 4 officers in one aircraft. Just imagine the intercom communication going on in that plane. Good grief. But yeah, you had all these different missions. It would be interesting if they would be able to crew up a single aircraft and then now have 4 of you out on a mission just flying 2 aircraft. You know what I mean? You would quickly learn where disciplined communication comes into effect. And, I don't know if you all learned the comm brevity word Judy.
And that's probably the brevity I hate the most, because it means I have failed at my job.
Well, actually, it doesn't necessarily mean you failed. It just means shut up. You don't want to hear anymore.
Yep.
There's something else going on that's a little bit more important for the time being. We actually had a guy in our squadron called Judy. That was his call sign. The guy could not keep his mouth shut.
That's great.
Yeah, so we called him Judy.
We had a guy like that. We called him Wolf.
What do you call him?
Just an in joke. We called him Wolf. That was his call sign.
The closest we have to that double crew is actually the VF-103 Jolly Rogers in the squadron, and they fly the Tomcat. So
Yeah,
they've got the pilot and the Rio. So
Oh, okay.
we've definitely seen a lot of funny conversations happen between the pilots and the Rios, because when you fly DCS just as a pilot in the Tomcat, you have a jester AI in the back that you can give very generic commands that he kind of will listen to sometimes, and it's a nightmare to fight with. But you can actually, we have trained inside of 103. There's entire training regimens for pilots, and then there's a whole separate one just for Rios. So how to do those communications, make all of those things happen, proper deployments of the Phoenixes, Sparrows, how to make sure the pilot knows what he wants. And when I've had the chance to be a Rio every once in a while for those guys, you'll notice on some of the earlier ones, and you really hit on this of not shedding your responsibilities, they'll want a human Rio so they can say, oh, all I have to do think about is flying now. I don't have to think. It's like, no, you don't. You actually have to think more now because you've got somebody else who's going to question you.
Yeah, because you got to monitor that, especially when you're doing an intercepting. I'm watching that radar, and he goes into range well search, into single target track well scan. He sorts it out, sorts the proper target, and then when it's time to employ weapons, he says, "Your radar, Roger, it's fine
my
now."
radar. And
then I take it and then employ and either snip it or cut it as needed, or kill LtCol, whatever it may be, and then away we go. Whatever the tactic is, we're either going to clean the merge up or we're going to bug. And at that point, it's back to your radar. Hand it back to him, and then away he goes.
Yep. And we've got that as well, where we'll call your radar, my radar, your radar.
Yep.
And it's definitely a completely different experience, even just from the control side going into the backseat of a Tomcat, just how different it is to have, you've got that communication where you may be doing FAC-A with a Lantern pod and using the Tomcat's radar to be that AWACS within the game and making those call-outs. Like, I definitely see how being in a twin-seater Hornet can be a very similar situation. Did you ever have the chance to do FAC-A or work with anybody on FAC-A while you were flying in the two-seater?
Yes. Yeah, we had some. One of the disciplines that they lost, they dropped, I don't know why the Marine Corps, it just kind of silently went away, was called TAC-A. We used to have a tactical air coordinator here who could do both FAC-A and, imagine, he could also help manage the stacks of multiple aircraft waiting to come in and then link up with the forward air controller. Or if he needed to, he could be the forward air controller airborne. Mark a target for him and say, there it is, go get it, and time on target, et cetera, and run your 9-line brief and all that. But yeah, we got to work with the FAC-As, but for the most part, one of the things that the Iraqi theater was much different. It was because now everything, you've got all that Tattle Link, everything's linked in, Tattle C and everything else. And so now you're getting the picture. So the only thing AIC is going to provide for me is anything that's outside of what data links are not already, betting in. Now, to be honest with you, the data link picture could be gigantic, okay? But as a Hornet guy, I don't need to see beyond 80 miles, picture. Because first off, I could care less. If they're 188 miles away from me, they're not a threat, okay? Even if they're coming blazing away, they're not a threat until now they're getting to 80 to 60 nautical miles. It's like, okay, now I need to pay attention to that. But the picture's there, depending on how many assets you have on the ground and in the air at the given time. But yeah, just typically what it is, hey, this is my little fiefdom. I'm going to worry about this little, cast mission, and I know I got, Big Brother watching over my shoulder, and he'll let me know if there's a threat here. Typically, now this is another thing too. You do not do casts in a restrictive environment. If there's surface-to-air threats, if there's significant air-to-air threats, you're not doing casts, and the ground component commander knows that. Okay, and so you have to do, what's going on now is interdiction. You've got your CAT missions going on, trying to suppress that nonsense and, either push it back or get rid of it. Then you can do CAS, because CAS is so you're so focused at the battlefield. I'm looking at the ground. You know, even though it's 40 miles over there, I'm looking for dust, smoke, you know, flashes of explosion, everything. That's where the action is. I can't, and if I get spiked by an SA-6 and I know that it's, you know, 23 miles away, it's like, what am I doing? I got to get out of here. I got to move, you know, and so yeah, so the whole picture is built before you get thrown into an environment too.
Right.
And I don't know to what level DCS, you know, maybe throws that in the mix, like, hey, here's today's scheme of maneuver, objective alpha, you know, up on this mountain is what's going on. And then everybody, or is it everybody just shows up and it says, go out and fly, and if you meet some MiGs, go get them.
It really comes down to the way the mission is designed by the mission creator, and generally
Okay.
that'll be briefed before, and there'll actually be a full proper brief and a comms ladder and an operation flow and state of the enemy and what they're bringing, as well as the oasis you have within that certain coverage and what threats to expect. I mean, that's all created in the missions. So the mission creator will know that beforehand, but everyone else that comes with it may or may not get briefed on everything, just so they have to do a little bit of pre-planning, but also come in expecting something. I think either Bones or Bloat or Cyborg can speak more to that, as they do that more often.
Right. Yeah, and I'm sure, you know, the folks with, you know, prior military experience, especially, you know, in aviation military experience, they can come in and, you know, we could brief a scenario in 10 minutes now to the layman, or, you know, the enthusiast who's just getting involved with DCS and flying you know, line of departure, you know, what is that? You know, you know, those kind of things. They have to understand the basic scheme of maneuver and that kind of thing. And maybe that's something that I guess the mission developer would have to tailor it to his audience. You know, because if I got on DCS with a bunch of old, you know, Hornet guys, you know, we'd be slinging around with slang words, and we know what, you know, we're going to do. We're going to, hey guys, let's be serious. Okay, we come up with a real scenario and everything. And I don't necessarily dovetail into, you know, just get someone who's just, hey, I do DCS, but, you know, I'm fresh out of college and I've never been in the military. It's like, all right, hold on tight, because this is going to be fun, you know, and away we go.
And I think that's one of the things that is a hard balance for us, because, you know, I'm sure for you guys that, you know, if you had a 2-hour flight, you were probably spending double that in a brief and, you know, maybe double that in a debrief. Whereas for us, you know, we've got, you know, this is a hobby, and, you know, we've got maybe 3 hours to go. So we've got to say, okay, we want 2 hours in the jet. We've got maybe 30 minutes before and maybe 15 minutes afterwards. So trying to figure out, you know, what's important and what to do, because, you know, the last thing people want to do is, you know, sit around planning for 2 hours before we go up. So
right,
that's hard for us, because there's a lot more that it would go better if we had the time to really spend and brief it all out. But at the same time, it's, you know, I think we'd run everybody off if we did that.
Well, I think, yeah, it's just, and again, this is something that the impression in my mind, it harkens back to Leroy Jenkins. You know, remember the guy, okay, I want you to go in and go get the dragon and you do this, and all of a sudden the guy just takes off. Like,
Yeah.
What's he doing?
The guy Wolf Bloat was talking about earlier, he almost got his call sign changed to Leroy.
Well, hey, sometimes you earn those things.
So until recently, the whole mission design kind of thing was a very sort of predetermined affair. You had to really spend a lot of time, and I mean hours and hours and hours. A single one of us would spend, you know, designing the mission, producing all of the, you know, PowerPoints or what have you. Recently, there's a third-party developer who made a tool for us where we can change the battlefield up while people are flying. Because previously, you have to design the mission, save it, and then you host it, and that's it, you know. And if you just have to absolutely change something, then that's it. Everybody's out. Everybody's spooling their jets up again in 5 minutes, you know. Okay. So now we actually get a tool which allows us to do smaller scenarios, but very, very quickly. So we had a mission that we were running. I think Tex, you made it for our sort of more experienced guys, and then at the same time in the same mission, I took the newbies out, and I said to them, look, you're just going to be, you know, providing DCA for the carrier group whilst these other guys are doing the mission that was pre-done. I'm just going to be throwing in a couple of MiG-21s or, you know, or what have you, dynamically into the mission, and just creating those little tiny scenarios which are much easier for them to, you know, to jump in and react to, without affecting the entire mission where everybody else is flying. So they could get the exposure to, you know, to the comms around the boat and maybe the you know, command and control frequency for the other guys while they're operating. And then, you know, I can still throw little bits and pieces at them without having to restart the whole mission. So it has been improving significantly in the last year or so.
Okay. Well, that's good to hear. It sounds like it is getting pretty evolved, and trying to get it as close to real as they can. That's pretty interesting.
Sure. I had one question, because earlier you were talking about, you know, cooperating with Apaches, which by the way we also do. We don't fly them as a group as much, but we do have two-seater Apaches. We have the Mudhen recently as well, which is also obviously a two-seater, and we do have some other aircraft that are two-seaters. There's an F4 coming that's going to be a two-seater, I believe, and I think we've got the Hind as well, which is a two-seat helicopter, obviously. So my question was going to be, did you operate with another relight disabled jet that we all know and love, which is the Harrier? Did you work with any of those guys during your missions?
Typically, where you can work with them is, obviously you're going to provide, bad guy support. If they want bogey air, they can get bogey air. We come in and simulate a MiG-29. When you get embedded with them, you don't necessarily see, peace, love, and harmony of Hornets and Harriers flying together, because typically your Harriers are your strikers, and the Hornets now are going to fly high cover or cap. They could also be strikers, but the Harrier packages, typically those guys, we would work it where we would, let's say I have a large scale exercise going on. I got my AWACS, if I had AWACS, or my GCI is going to paint as big, best of pictures they can out to, whatever they can see. I got my tankers, I got my armada of C-130s. We can touch and get gas as we need coming on and off cap if we're defensive, or if we're offensive and we have strikers. We're going to protect those Harrier guys, because they're probably going to come in a little bit lower, and because they're much more accurate, a little bit tighter bomber. So we need to provide them the best coverage. So we sweep out with the prowlers and do all the jamming and any CAD that needs to be done to basically clear a path. These guys get, they strike in. We can also provide escort for them, but you don't necessarily see Hornets and Harriers embedded, within visual range of one another. Like a wingman type of thing. We'll be, mutually supportive, through, the radar, or, along the intercept path, or the strike package path. So yeah, you do work with them, but that's how the coordination is done, pretty much up to that point. Then once the Harriers got the skinny on, look, this is how the mission's going to happen, they put their head down and they just say, hey, here's how we're going to peel this onion. This is how the target's going to be, we're going to employ weapons on these type of weapons, these type of deliveries. And here's our ingress and egress, routes. Here's our abort criteria. If 83 MiG-29s appear over the horizon, we're out. Mission to scrub that. So they go through all those wickets. But yeah, when you working together, that's working together for us. Is we'll fly our cover, you fly your strike package, and we're going to work the same mission.
Absolutely, and this is what it works out for us as well, because we do have a AV-8B squadron within the wing here as well. So when we do have those joint missions, that's pretty much how the cookie crumbles. They do the mud and we do the top, pretty much.
Yeah, and
But it's really great to
nothing-
kind of understand that, that dynamic. Then you kind of have the responsibility for them to be safe. We're going to be doing the suppression and or the SEAD for them, and then they can come in.
Sure, yeah, because what the strikers want to hear is, hey, if there's a threat, particularly airborne threat, then they'll brief in there that, hey, this strike route is going to lean away, okay? And what they want to hear is the Hornets committing, or the fighters committing to basically stiff arm them out at range, so now they come in unimpeded into the target area. That's all. What it's all about. They come in, they're clean, they release their weapons, and they get out of there. We just stiff arm, if deploy is needed, but then if you have to, just chase the bad guys away, and then everybody head home. So yeah, you got to work together that way. It's just like, think of a sports analogy with the lineman and the running back. The running back's got the ball, but the lineman's got to clear a path. Just a little opening. That's all he needs. Okay, and that's his mission. Well, Creighton, have we talked your ear off enough?
I do have one more question because you mentioned it to me the other day, and now I want to hear the story of how you became a part of the Martin Baker Club.
Oh yes, the Caterpillar Club. I am a lifetime member as of May 9th of 2000. So I'll be coming up on my 24th anniversary here next month. I had to shell out of a Hornet. I was flying with a Navy pilot going through the F-18 school. So I was an instructor at the time out at the Miramar. We were in a two-seater, and the mission was his first time dropping ordnance with an F-18. Okay, and that's always fun when you take a new Hornet guy and he starts slinging iron down to the ground. They're all over the place, but he was a good stick. His call sign was Benny. His last name was Hill. Old Benny Hill. But Benny was a Navy. I think he was a JG at the time. I was a 04, so I was a major. I was the training officer at the time, and we briefed 4-ship of what we call circle the wagons. Basically concentric rings painted on the ground, big target, hulking in the bullseye with other miscellaneous targets out at the Shade Tree target complex, which is just north of Interstate 8, right next to El Centro, just north of El Centro, California, halfway between San Diego and Yuma. If you're looking at Southern California, almost smack dab in the middle. So we're down there. We're doing a left-hand 15,000 foot, 45-degree dive, 7,000 foot release, 7,500 foot release, if I remember correctly. Back up, and we have a 4-ship, and we call it circle the wagons. So essentially, what happens is, as you drop your weapon, okay, you're releasing, and you're on the dive, you can hear the plane behind you call in. So that means he's bringing his nose to bear toward the target. And then as you pull up off the target after you release, you see your interval in front of you who was just coming off target. So it's pretty tight. Okay, you can keep sight of everybody. We're all within a couple miles of one another. And we are on our 11th. So we had 12 practice bombs. Okay, we're carrying single center line Hornet, 2 MERS under the wings, 6 bombs apiece. So we briefed 1 bomb at a time, and we taught them different HUD techniques, CCIP, auto, manual. You go through the steps, and you basically work your way up. And he's on his 11th pass of 12, so we're almost done. Okay, comes down, drops the pretty decent hit, pretty good release. I could tell by the parameters of the aircraft and everything, because I'm watching from the HUD. I can see his HUD back there, but I could tell what angle of bank the wings were, how many G's were on the aircraft. And, you don't want to see negative G and all this nonsense because you start to goofy things happening with ordnance. So he releases, we pull off, we catch sight of our interval who's in front of us. Because we're -3 in the flight of 4, right? So there's -2, and it's about the time I look over there, all of a sudden it felt like we collided with another aircraft, which made no sense because I heard -4 call in as we're pulling off target. So I know everybody's separated because I can see 2, I heard 4, and bam. Well, Benny's flying, I'm the instructor, okay? So I'm not doing anything other than trying to figure out what the heck is going on. No kidding, it was about a second and a half after that big thud that the engine fire left comes on, okay? So Benny, basically the bold-faced procedures is, throttle off, okay? You shut the engine down if you got a fire in it. And so I'm thinking, no big deal, okay? That throttle comes off, cool, we got another engine, we'll go single engine, and I look over my right shoulder and I go, there's El Centro right there. 8,000-foot runway, that's where the Blue Angels practice all the time. Hey, we're gonna save the day, okay, a little stressful. Maybe 5 seconds after he shut that left motor off, we had engine fire right. Okay. And I look down and I see the right throttle start to come back. Okay. And I think what Benny was thinking was min practical for flight. Well, unfortunately, when you come off a bombing run, we were pointing 45, 30 degrees nose up and decelerating rapidly, especially since we just lost one motor. And you can't come back on the throttle when your nose is high like that. So I grabbed the stick and I jammed it right into afterburner. And I said, no, don't do that. I said, we need power and let's get the nose down so we can start flying this aircraft. Because now we got dual firelights and he hadn't, so the procedure is, throttle off, firelight push. When you push a firelight, it arms the fire extinguisher system. Then you hit the fire extinguisher system, so it's 2 separate buttons there. He didn't even have a chance to push the firelight by the time the engine fire right. So now we have, sequential engine fires rapidly one after the other, which is not in the NATOPS manual at the time. So now we're dealing with a dual engine fire. Well, so we're losing airspeed. Okay, and we're losing thrust. And so I tell Benny, I said, I got the jet. And he says, you got it. And he throws his hands up and then he immediately puts his hands back down. And what he's doing is he's tightening his lap belts. He's cinching into the seat real tight. And as I got the right, motor full afterburner, not knowing that the right, the left motor was done because we shut it off. The right motor was eating itself. Unfortunately, we didn't have enough altitude and airspeed to do a relight. Hindsight being 2020, what had happened is the fire detection system in the Hornet goes on for 2 different reasons. The ambient temperature inside the engine bay reaches a certain temperature, okay, or fire line, which are those fine little wires that run, there's multiple, like a simple spider web coming back. In case you get shrapnel or some chunk part of the motor comes out, it cuts one of those lines, that'll give you a fire line indication. What had happened was the right motor was coming apart and it sent a fragment into the left engine bay, cutting the left fire detection system, giving us a left fire light first. Okay, had it just been a right engine fire, put the fire out, So what was happening is we didn't see this, but as we're climbing up, Dash 4 comes off target and sees us now apexing over the hill, and he just sees a ball of flame 90 feet long coming out behind our. Okay. So the mishap board went through a full investigation, and essentially the culprit was the right motor. Okay. But unfortunately, it damaged the left fire detection system, which forced us to shut, by procedure, shut the engine down. Well, if you can get 250 knots, and if you're, below 10,000 feet, okay, you can restart a motor that you've shut down to spool up the RPMs on the N1 fan, the front fan. Unfortunately, left engine's off, right motor has just now ate itself. And as we apex and the nose is coming over, I got the throttle full, thinking I'm in afterburner, but I'm watching and the RPM's coming down, and I'm pulling back on the stick and I'm not getting any response. Okay. And the Hornet has 3 different flight controls. You have CAS, okay, computer augmented. All right. Then you have DEL, direct electric link. And then you have mechanical, which is simply, I got cables running back to the stabilators, okay? And I can fly the Hornet that way. Well, I'm pulling on the stick and nothing's happening. That nose is just tracking straight down to the ground, okay? About the time the nose gets about 10 degrees below the horizon, generators kick offline, which means, that tells me we're now below 60% RPM. On the motor that was on, it's now it's probably just a chunk of burning metal right now, and it's worthless. So we lost our generators. And unfortunately, in the Hornet, you cannot glide in the Hornet. Once you've lost your generators, you've lost hydraulic power, and even your mechanical link, you're done. Okay. Now we've just been boxed into a corner that you can't get out of. And I just over the intercom said to Benny, I said, "Are you ready?" He said, "Yes, sir." And I said, "All right, eject, eject, eject." And bam, we went out. So we were probably at about 8,000 feet, pointed straight down toward the earth when we ejected. So you go through the trauma of all that. So in the Hornet, the sequence goes backseater first, then front seater. Okay. And the reason is you don't want the front seater to go first, because then his rocket blast would come over the guy in the back, with the airstream and all that. So I go out. So canopy basically just gets clamshelled open a little bit into the airstream and gets ripped away, and then my seat goes, and then Benny's goes. But because we're pointed nose down, by the time the chute opens up and I feel the shock of that, and I look up and I grab the risers and I see a good chute, I look down and there's Benny about 300 feet below me in his chute. And I could see his arms are up holding on to his risers. And I said, okay, that tells me Benny's conscious, which is good. And then right between my heels, so Benny's like right here as I'm looking down, and then directly below me is a mushroom cloud. The Hornet that just lawn darted right into the desert out there at the shade tree. So yeah, that whole sequence that I just described, from the time that we were coming down the chute and we hit the bomb until we pulled the ejection, about 17 seconds, I think. That's how long it took to go through that. So yeah, that was my shell out experience. So
That's incredible.
did it answer your question?
It did. It did.
Did the investigation ever work out why the right motor disintegrated?
I think happened. This has happened. I only know of 2 occurrences this happened. There was a gentleman named Ed Barber was taking off out of Kunsan one time, and I'll link these stories. He was taking off, and he's on his takeoff roll. So typically, what you do is you run up to mill power, wipe out the controls, you get your feet on the brakes, everything looks good, temperatures, RPMs, and then you release the brakes and then go into full afterburner. He goes into full afterburner, and as the plane lunges forward, he's probably at 30, 40 knots, not very fast. I mean, you can't even see it in the HUD because the HUD only goes down to 48 knots. And kaboom, same thing, big explosion, engine fire. I forget which side it was, but he gets the engine fire. Okay, aborts the takeoff, shuts off the motor, pulls off the runway, shuts the plane down, gets out, and crash, fire, and rescue come over and put out the smoke. What had happened was, so imagine the fuselage, that long pencil like fuselage of the Hornet. You got those little intakes kind of receding way back there underneath the Lexus, and that intake wall, okay, is right by the fuel cells, the internal fuel cells, which are behind the cockpit. Okay, tanks 1 through 4. And what had happened is the intake wall actually failed, okay, because there's a lot of suction and pressure, delta P coming through that when those engines are pulling. And it was just a fatigue factor. And literally the intake wall just cracked open a little bit. And then you have all that, force coming in, and it just dumped. It just ripped the bladder of the fuel thing right into the intake. And that was just ingested right into the motor, which just, injecting raw fuel at the front end creates for quite a, amazing effect, with an engine like that. So boom. So they actually had to strike the airframe because of the damage that was done to that, the subsequent concussion of the explosion and everything. That is what they think happened to us, airborne. Coming off target, you go into full power, coming up, not going afterburner, but you're at full power. And if that intake wall fails, it's going to ingest itself. Okay, it's going to ingest the intake. And here's why they think that. The investigative mishap board, so they can go through when you lawn dart an aircraft into the ground like that, your great big, turbofan engine or turbojet is now crushed down to about 1.5 feet, 2 foot tall, right? Just accordion. Layer by layer, they go through and they figure out what's going on. And the reason they do that is they can tell if the engine was still turning when it impacted the ground, because they'll find dirt and natural, debris a couple of stages in, or if it's only at stage 1, they know the engine wasn't turning, et cetera. So they can figure all this out. Here's what they did find. Back through the different layers of the motor, they found a material that was non-organic, and it was identical to the same material that they used to put the embedded fibers in those self-sealing fuel cells that are inside the rubber. So now they're thinking, okay, they can't 100% say that's exactly what happened, but how did those fibers get into the front of the engine and then make its way to the back of the motor? Those fibers should not have been there. So they think that there's a good possibility that we swallowed our own intake, which is bizarre. And then subsequent, fire. But then when that right motor went, bam, unfortunately, that firewall between the two engines on an F-18, if you had both engines removed and you walked into a hangar and you were standing up in the empty hangar or the empty engine casing there, and you took a screwdriver, you could just go boop, right between on that bulkhead. You could punch through it, with a good jab. So it's not the strongest. It's not like this titanium shield or anything that separates the two engines. It's just a firewall, just a piece of I'm sure reinforced aluminum shielding, but it's not substantial. So that's what they think happens with the investigative board.
And do you think your left engine was still good at that time?
Yes. Personally, yes. I think we shut down a perfectly good motor, but when there's very few emergencies that you have to act right now. Okay. And what's funny is by the time I was a lieutenant colonel, and you look through the NATOS manual and you realize you've been flying the Hornet a little while, you go, man, I've had every single emergency in here. You know, I've experienced every single one except for this obscure electrical, you know, battery failure or something like that. Planing link failure, you know, catastrophic fuel leak, you know, obviously engine fires and had to eject, you know, all kinds of problems. All right. And a fire is one that you don't think about in a second. Most emergencies, you know, I'm flying along at 35,000 feet off the coast of Japan, and I get dual bleed caution. And I just pulled the engine back a little bit, and I said, all right, let's think about this. What's going on? Why am I getting a dual bleed air fill? So I can kind of talk to myself and have a conversation, tell my wingman, hey, knock it off. I got a dual bleed warning, or dual bleed air off. An engine fire light, I don't, it's all hands on deck. Start moving your hands and make sure you do the procedures correctly. And unfortunately, engine fire left, bam, that motor's coming off because I don't want a fire spreading on the aircraft. Unfortunately, you know, we were at the mercy of the, you know, the fate of the fire detection gods, or whatever you want to call it. They weren't having it that day. I was actually kind of mad. You know, I always thought, you know, Captain Kirk could get his way out of anything. And I was mad when I was literally mad as I'm reaching down to it. I said, I can't believe I'm going to pull this stupid handle. You know, and I did. It was an e-ticket ride at Disneyland.
Do you have any back or neck problems afterwards, or you feel like you got through it?
I had a little bit, but I just had to really. I did lose a little bit of height. Okay, I was a 1/4 inch shorter, and the flight surgeon who flew out, or actually drove, the flight surgeon came from Yuma. He drove out to El Centro and met us out there, because what ended up happening is, and Creighton, this was something that tied into the Black Hawk thing, was Benny and I shell out of this airplane. Of course, the ELTs are going off. All right, the emergency transport, you know, locator transmission. We've got that going out on guard. Well, it just so happened at that very moment at El Centro, there's a UH-60, an Army detachment had just been flying out of El Centro, and they all left, but they left one bird behind because it had to have some maintenance done on it. And they were doing some tail rotor balance or something like that, and they were working on it. And they look over and they hear an ELT come over the radios, because they got the maintenance guys out there, and they got the engine turning, and they're trying to figure out, you know, do whatever it is that the Army guys are doing with the tail rotor. They had a counterbalance on it, and they look over and they see a big plume of black smoke right out, you know, over the horizon right there in the desert, you know, off El Centro. So they go, hey, man, we got guys just, you know, we got emergency transmission going on. We got to go do something about this. So the maintenance guys strip off the counterbalance, and they hop in the helo, shut the doors, and fly right out to us. They just fly to the smoke, and then, oh, there they are right there, and they find us. And we were picked up within like 6 minutes of touching the ground. It was unbelievable. And so we get a free helicopter ride. Well, by then, Dash 4, okay, who was our, you know, so we're Dash 3, and our wingman is Dash 4 in the division. Dash 1 and 2 went home. Dash 4 landed at El Centro. Smoke Beidler, who ended up being the skipper of 101. So he lands the plane with his student. They come in and they find Benny and I, and we're in the infirmary. You know, they're getting us checked into the medical and all this stuff, while the flight surgeon's driving out. He got notified from I think the El Centro Tower or base ops. Said, hey, we need a flight surgeon out here. And they came and gave us a physical exam, and he's looking at my x-rays. He goes, yeah, and so mind you, this is May 9th of 2000. So what am I, 37 years old? Yeah, so 37, 38 years old. Yeah, I'm 38. I just turned 38. And he goes, hey, see that ghostly image down your spine? I go, yeah. He goes, that's arthritis. You know, get used to it. He goes, every male over the age of 35 starts developing arthritis of the spine. Some worse than others, but and sure enough, you can see it on that. But yeah, I haven't had any significant back or neck problems. I just have to. I had to make sure that I kept my core strength good and everything, so I don't get a sore back. Because if I don't, I will start to get some nasty pain sometimes. But other than that, it's manageable. My biggest deficit coming out of the military was my loss of hearing, tinnitus, and all that stuff.
Hey, sir, did you ever serve with Snake Dalton or Badger Arnett?
I did. Badger and I are pretty good friends, by the way. I visited Badger when he was stationed in Hawaii. Jay and Keith and I went out. We were just hanging out at his place, and we went played around on the North Shores of Hawaii. This is when they were at K-Bay, and then got to see Badger a few times when he was with Top Gun out at Miramar. I remember a funny story about Badger. He always wanted to do what he called the trifecta, but he never got it.
Hopefully it's
because
done
he
now.
was current in, back then Top Gun was flying the A4, I believe the A4M. They had the F-16 and the F-18, and he was current in all three. And he wanted to do a one day of his life where he took off in the morning and flew one aircraft, took off midday, did the other, took off in the afternoon, did the third, so he could fly all three. Many days he would fly two missions. He would do one, out of F-16 into a Hornet, out of the A4 into the F-16, etc. But he never got the trifecta, and he always kicked himself. He said, "Man, I wish I would have got that." But yeah, he ended up flying airlines when he got out. And sounds like you're familiar.
Did you ever? Well, yeah, I served with the Vikings and the Green Knights, so
nice.
Snake Dalton was my skipper.
Okay.
And then Badger was just kind of a base legend. Him and Snake would go at it, and they're kind of legends for BFM throughout the Marine Corps. So I wondered if you ever fought him.
No, I never got to fight Badger. I fought one of his squadron mates, Riff Raff. Riff Raff came back through when I was an instructor. So, yeah, the peer group was Snake Dalton. He would have been a lieutenant colonel when I would have been a captain, just to kind of give you an idea, peer group wise. So I was a few years behind him. But I knew Jay before, even back when I was an air support patrol officer. I knew Jay out at Miramar because a friend of mine that I went to school with here in Tucson and grew up with ended up going into the Lancers with Riff Raff and Badger and Skull and Troll, Minucci, all these famous names that I ended up recycling and recirculating through and meeting all these guys. And Marine Corps is a small world, as you well know. So that's how I got to meet Badger. And then one of his squadron mates at the time was Riff Raff, and he came back through. He went back to DC, I think, and did a Pentagon tour or a headquarters Marine Corps tour or something. Came back as an 05, and he's getting a refresher to get back in the cockpit again. So I'm going to be his instructor, and he and I got to go out and get to go penguin up with Riff Raff. So yeah, it was fun.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, Snake was. That's when I was with the Vikings when he took over. That was probably our most fun Westpac that we did, the Pacific Island hopping stuff. He was
was that? I think he was that out retired. Of El Toro?
No, that was at Miramar. So when I got there, yeah, I checked in the same day that the last Hornet was the last Hornet made by Boeing was made or landed, because then they started making the Supers. So it's like 2001 sometime.
Gotcha.
I think it was around 2001, 2002. Snake took over as skipper for Vikings, and then we did the Fishhook Island hopping campaign, which was a ton of fun. And
Oh
But
yeah.
I just the whole base, all the pilots from all over would always talk about. Well, there's even Navy pilots and Air Force pilots that talk about Snake and Badger and Fighter Pilot Podcast. Their names come up. They've never been interviewed. I talked to Snake not too long ago. He's with JetBlue. He did say that he did talk a little bit about Badger. I think Badger was from San Diego, right? He's kind of a surfer guy, right? and became a Hornet driver. But it's just kind of fun to hear stories from other people's perspectives of flying with those guys from the past. I only knew them as lieutenant colonels.
Yeah, Jay, Badger he was really good. He was a great BFM, and he was like you say, he was like the BFM guru at Top Gun, no less. And he said, yeah, so and so went out and they tried to show me something, and I put an end to it real quick. And he would just talk about it. He was like, yeah, he made a dumb move. He went nose down and put him out.
Yeah, there's one of the. We'll have to find it, but it's a Navy Tomcat Top Gun instructor talking about how good he was, and he's telling who does the hosting for that, Bone Fighter Pilot Podcast. What's his name?
Jello.
Yeah, Jello. So Jello's asking him, and so he's like, "Yeah, I was taking all these guys out." He's like, "So then it's time to fight the Marines." He's like, "Well, who do you want to fight?" He goes, "I don't care. Just give me your best guy." He's like, "Are you sure?" He said, "Yeah, just I don't care. Just give me your best guy." He's like, "So they put me up against this guy named Badger," and I'm like, "Badger? My name is that?" And he just mops the floor with me. Because he was killing everybody, and then he fights Badger, and Badger just like nothing. Basically, he said it was just a huge humbling experience for him. Like he just couldn't believe that Badger could do what he could do. And I'd heard that those guys could do things in a Hornet that a lot of pilots would say that's impossible. How can you do that? How can you be up that high? Just things like that. Like they knew the jet so well that they could do things that was like how they couldn't. It was they couldn't think about how was that physically possible to do that in the Hornet.
Yeah, it was. Badger was real good with that. He was really in tune to that BFM. So yeah, that's neat. Yeah, Badger's kind of a quiet guy too. I suppose if I reached out now, I could get in touch with him, and all he'd want to do is just go have dinner and talk about what his kids are doing and stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, we'd love to have him on if you can convince him. Snake's going to come on at some point. He's just busy. Well, they're both pretty busy with flying, right? Their schedules with the airlines, but.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Charles, did you ask the question that you wanted to ask? You didn't know if it's gonna get answered. Oh, it was the ejection one. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, it's embarrassing from the standpoint of I have logged more takeoffs than landings in my flight logbook.
Oh.
See,
Well, I mean, you had two pilots land separately that flight, so you could count it that way.
yeah. Well, and the funny story behind that is everything was done electronically back then. So when you came back and you typed in your your nav flare, you had to you put in your takeoff time, land time, takeoff location, what kind of approach you did, if you did an approach, what kind of landings, day, night, etc. Well, I got back and the maintenance chief, Master Gun says, "Sir, you got to finish a nav flare." I said, "You got to be kidding me." He goes, "No, sir." He goes, "That's just, we got to at least close the loop on this flight, even though the plane is destroyed and it's, buried in the desert, and it still is to this day. They could not recover the entire airframe, including the HUD tape and all that. But anyway, so I went to the computer and I said, okay, well, let's see, May 9th, I took off from Miramar, KNKX, whatever the 4-letter identifier is, took off at this time, 1700. land time. Well, let's see, it was about 45 minutes into the flight. Okay, so I put a land time, and then it says type of landing. So I went to, it was all drop down menu. So I went to the Harrier section and picked day vertical landing. and I logged that in my logbook. It's the only thing that made sense to me.
I was gonna hope you said visual approach.
Yeah. Yeah, we were VFR the whole time. So visual day vertical landing. That sounds good to me. And I
They say in the Navy, you can't be an admiral, an aviator admiral, if you haven't ejected. Because a bunch of them have.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and what's kind of scary, when you do if you look at like if you were an actuarial and you did the real hardcore bean counting, if you are involved in a significant mishap like that, and I think I was like right at when I pulled the handle, I was just over 1,000 hours in cockpit in the Hornet at the time. The odds of you having another significant event like that go up, and they don't know. They were doing all kinds of studies on it and everything, but it's kind of like, somebody's got your number, and it ain't you. And so, yeah.
Right.
Well, I tell you one thing. When I had my catastrophic fuel leak, it was post ejection, flying time. I took off out of Korat, Thailand, and what had happened was the main fuel line coming off the pump, from the fuel cell into the engines decoupled in right after I got wheels in the well, and I'm just pouring gas out the belly of my airframe, and I'm watching my gas gauge just count down. Doop, 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 doop. And I realized I have to get this plane on the ground right now, and I'll be darned if I'm going to pull that ejection handle again. And
I mean,
so
somebody should speak to the AMO about this, I think.
that's right. Yeah, with the double ammo especially. Yeah, at the time I was the XO, and so I just literally got my gear up in the wheel wells, recognized what the problem is, and I just turned downwind, dropped my landing gear as I'm just pouring gas all over the countryside of Thailand, and then just turned around and landed. It was the shortest flight in my career. And by the time I rolled out to the end of the runway, I had about 1,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds of fuel left. And that's it.
And that jet shuts off at what, 500 pounds?
Yep. Yeah. So, and we were slick. So we were at about 10.0.
So you'll be pleased to hear that in DCS, if you get shot by as much as an AK-47 with one bullet, you experience like the exact same thing, no
Catastrophic fuel leak.
every single time, pretty much. The
Yeah.
damage model is a little bit too coarse for that. Yeah,
Okay.
any shrapnel hits you, you're almost certainly bleeding all of your fuel out.
Well, I suppose the golden BB works in the fuel line too, but typically you get hit in a fuel cell, it can withstand that. It's supposed to be self-sealing and survivable, but then again.
Yeah, this is one of the things that's not quite finished enough. There are other jets that have better, more granular damage model. I was just going to ask a very quick follow-up question to
Yes.
that ejection scenario as well. You mentioned, obviously you're seeing the jet below you. Is it really difficult to steer the emergency chute?
No.
No. Okay. But
So,
and is it slow enough to prevent injury, or is it really small and you really hit the ground hard?
Get on your roof of your one-story house and jump off.
Mm-hmm.
That's about what it's like. So if you're not careful, you can really mess up your leg or hip or ankle or something. But lucky for us, we're over the desert. What was funny is because we had a couple of minutes of rest and relaxation in our spa on the way down. I'm just trying to follow Benny, Okay, because where he lands, I want to land so I can get to him as quickly as possible. Make sure that and have each other check each other out, make sure we're okay. Because when you're in shock like that, your bone could be sticking out of your arm. You don't feel it. So as we're descending down, I can kind of feel a little bit of a westerly wind pushing us, and the bombing facility was right along a canal, and on the other side of the canal, outside of the bombing facility, is lush farmland, a bunch of big acres, millions of acres of alfalfa fields. And I'm going, desert, farm. I'm going for the farm. So I start steering for the farm, and about 30 seconds later, I'm looking, and I go, well, I'm going to clear the canal if I want to, unless I steer back into the wind and then stay right real close to Benny. And I was trying to, thinking maybe if I can coax Benny to, hey, go to the soft green stuff over there instead of the hard desert because there's rocks and stuff over here. Well, Benny's just kind of tracking due north, and I'm tracking like northeast on my descent, going, all right. And then I look and I see cows in the pastures. And then I think, where there's cows, there's a bull. Okay. And I said, nah, I'm going for the desert. The last thing I, wanted was the headlines, pilot survives ejection, gets gored by Brahma bull or something, like that. I was maybe overthinking the scenario, and I just said, you know what, I'll leave the cows alone. And so I went in and landed. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely. It's
Okay.
just I was just curious if it was easy to steer and but yeah,
Yes.
sounds like you have pretty
Yeah.
good control.
Yeah, if the winds aren't out of limits, it's very steerable. Surprisingly, I became a parachutist. I could actually steer left and right where I wanted to go, within reason, and got me to land on some sand out there in the desert.
You
I've heard some.
ever jump out of a plane since, or did that scratch the
Oh
engine?
no. No. I have no desire to do that anymore.
I've heard some stories of other people that have had to punch the canopy and eject in situations like that. When it happened to you and you had that engine blow out on you, the other people that have had ejections said the time seemed to really dilate when that happened, and
yeah.
a second felt like an hour. Did you notice that time shift when you suddenly realized, like, oh crap, I'm in a dangerous situation?
I remember it didn't seem like, a split second didn't seem like an hour, but I do remember minute details that when I showed up for work. So what happened, I think that was a Thursday when I shelled out. I'd have to go back and look at my calendar, May 9th of 2000. There's people who could do that in their head. But I got back from El Centro the next day. The skipper said, see you next week. And I got back, and I walk into my office on Monday morning, and there's a civilian clothes gentleman sitting in my chair. Excuse me, can I help you? It was a gentleman from England to present me my Martin Baker Award, because Benny and I were number 16 and 17 to successfully, shell out with a SJU seat. And he gave me the, Caterpillar, Lifetime Caterpillar Club and all this fun stuff. So anyway, what he was there for was to thoroughly debrief me on just the ejection sequence itself, because Martin Baker takes, real detailed notes, because they're always trying to improve their product. Matter of fact, I gave him some insight to underneath the seat. There's a thing called a kicker motor that impulses you left or right. So, back seat first, front seat second, back seat left, front seat right, I believe is the way the rock. So you come out not only separated, longitudinally, but laterally, so to maximize the opportunity to miss each other. because the last thing you want is me to separate from my seat and have my seat go smashing right down into Benny or something like that. Okay, bad things. So he takes detailed notes, and I describe things that were happening from the time I pulled the handle and what I heard, what I saw, and everything. And when he was all done, he says, "Okay, that time from handle pull to this event that you remember?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "That was 0.8 seconds." And I had him write about a paragraph.
Wow.
So yeah, your brain does something there. That instinct to survive and all that other stuff, goes on full alert. So yeah, that was kind of interesting.
Have you had a situation like that since then?
No, nothing close to that. Yeah,
How
that one,
cool.
you want to talk about a full cavalcade of emotions just crammed into about a second and a half. It's and then of course you have the physical aspect of it too, physiological. So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah,
You said May 9th?
May 9, 2000.
It was a Thursday.
Okay, look at that.
Owns you would.
My memory serves me correct.
I'm sitting here with
For
a calendar
once.
on my computer.
Oh, there you go. But yeah, so remember that day like it happened yesterday, which is bizarre. There's a few days like that I have. Even there are certain flights, certain missions I did and everything. I can still remember who I flew with, what happened, what time we took off, all what the weather was like. Just certain things stick out like that.
I can't be the only one noticing here, but we've had conversations with pilots before, and I'm gonna have to say your recall of the detail of the various systems, and you were talking about exactly how things work, and it is very, very impressive. Compared to some of the other pilots we've spoken to who are barely 10 years out of their career, and they're like, oh yeah, I can't remember that.
Well, I think well, thank you for that compliment, but just give me some time. I'm getting older, so it'll start to wear off. But when you have an affinity, a love for flying and aviation, it's not just a job, it's something that you truly love. I mean, Creighton will tell you about it, because I'm still here 61 years old building F-18 model, scale model kits, kind of like you guys like the flying aspect of it. I like that part too, but I also like the aesthetics of it. So my whole life was like just and so as I'm going through my career, I'm just absorbing this stuff up, and I'm just eating it up. And it's not that it became like an idol for me, but I really cherished it, and I really paid attention, and I really liked it. And what I always did, what helped was becoming an instructor. If you're kind of weak in a subject area, try teaching it. And you'll find that you have to dig really deep to be able to present the material to somebody, and especially somebody who doesn't get it, who maybe doesn't understand it. You have to learn, okay, maybe I should come at it from a different way and teach them that way. It was, if you can do that with any subject matter, it really gives you a stronger appreciation for it. So that now, admittedly, I can remember things from my childhood with extreme detail. Little League baseball games, and what the count was, and who the team was that we were playing, and who the coach was, who was on second, what's on first. Oh wait. But, yeah, it just so I think I was gifted with a good memory with some of the detail type of things, and then I'll forget where I put my keys. Sometimes, like all of us, but
that's called
I can
dementia.
still remember. Yeah, I can still remember missions I was flying, 20-some years ago. People interacting, things that were said, it's just, yeah. I guess different folks have different capacity for that, or I don't know if it's a capacity or if it's a maybe an attitude of, well, I just don't care about that anymore. You know, the Marine Corps doesn't write me paychecks anymore, so what do I care? Well, no, actually, I for some reason it's stuck in here, you know.
So speaking of things stuck in there, at what point in your pilot career, or maybe even in your instructor career, as you were going through it, did you hit that point where you kind of stepped back and said, wow, this is really cool, like I might have made it?
I was riding a bicycle to work one morning, what we affectionately called a Binjo bomber, when I was stationed in Japan, and these big, ugly looking bicycles that you could buy for, you know, $5 from the previous pilot, you know, previous squadron that was there. You would get it from everybody passed down the same bikes, the same cars. You just kept them going. I'm riding a bike to work because, you know, I could, I don't need to use the automobile because you're right on base there in Iwakuni. And it was a muggy, like first part of summer, muggy morning, kind of warm. And I'm on a bicycle, and I said to myself, I can't believe I'm getting paid to do this. I really can't. And I mean, I said, I can't believe something went wrong in the universe. Okay. Stars misaligned, and they decided to let me do this job and to get paid to do it. So yeah, I knew that it was, wow, this is a lot of fun, and I should, really, appreciate it.
It's not surprising that you immediately knew what that one was.
Oh yeah.
No hesitation. Yeah, I was riding a bike when I was in Japan.
Yeah, I remember that. Well, because I think that it was that emotion I remember of, wow, it was like it was like all of a sudden I put things into perspective, and I said, here you are, this butthead captain riding in a flight suit on a bicycle, with a goofy helmet on, going into work, and you're gonna go fly an F-18. It's like, this is too fun.
Yeah, we've got a guy in our squadron that was an F-14 Rio and is currently a sim instructor at Pensacola in a T-45, and he says they pay me to get up early in the morning, so I'll do everything else for free.
Yeah, that's right. And then, of course, I parked the bike and, come walking in, and I'm met by my gunnery sergeant, and he tells me about what happened on Liberty last night, and then reality sets back. All right, now we got to take care of the Marines. Somebody got in trouble. We got a awards presentation later on today, and I got a counseling session with staff sergeant, whatever, later on. So then, okay, now real work starts happening. Yeah.
How cool.
Yeah.
Guess maybe my second part.
We've been yapping on the computer for quite a while, haven't we? I'm just looking
Yeah,
at the clock.
it's been a 2 hours 15 minutes thereabouts.
No, I think it's been 1 hour. It's just the time dilation.
Glad to know that we're a traumatic incident you have to remember, Patrick. Appreciate
That's
that.
right. We're all going through it.
All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, there's 20 years in the Marine Corps, and Creighton, you could attest to this too. The stories of the things that happen to you on a day-to-day basis, the people you meet, and the things that you find. This could be a year-long series. Every day you could talk another aspect of something that happened at boot camp or officer candidate school, or just prior to retirement, or you run the gamut of all the different things that happened. It was just a lifetime crammed into 20 years. It's amazing.
I'll send a laundry list of questions to send you about various pilots like Buck Garza and Smoke Craft and all. I'm sure you know a ton of these guys.
I've heard, yeah. So these names are starting to ring a bell. Now, I didn't necessarily fly in the same units with those guys, But we all knew one another, vicariously through either the rumor mill, word of mouth, or bumping into them at the club or something like that. And then obviously, if you got to fly a mission against them or with them, you're in a brief together or something. Yeah, there's quite a few names out there that I have some fond memories of.
That's cool. Thanks.
Yeah.
We definitely appreciate your time today, and for those of us that never served or never got to do it, DCS is kind of a cool way for us to kind of live vicariously through some of that, and still feel like we can relate a little bit. So appreciate your service. Thank you for that, and thank you for your time today. It's been really awesome to sit down and pick your brain.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure. Appreciate the question and the attentiveness. This has been a lot of fun chatting.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you.
Yes, thank you.
I think if you ever wanted to watch one of our op nights, I think you'd be more than welcome to join in and take a spectator seat to it or something and see the madness unfold.
Yeah,
Back some memories.
I'll do what I'll do is, if I can, we'll work it out. I'll get a camera in my house and I'll project the screen and I'll put my silhouette in front and I'll do the Mystery Science Theater 3000 thing, and I'll be making smart aleck remarks as the cascade goes down, and you'll just hear me going, "Hey, what's this guy doing?"
We do that on Ox anyway. Don't worry about it.
Oh, okay. Good.
Every Oxcom is just a peanut gallery when there's a case recovery going on.
No, it's got to be that way. You gotta rib one another and push each other. That's what the peers are there for.
Very quickly mentioning, one of the guys had mentioned the guy who's actually doing flight sim. His call sign in the squadron is Millie. And one day we were just doing a fun flight, and I was actually the pilot in the 14, and he was the Rio again. And as we're taxiing out of, I think we were like simulated in Syria. Even on the taxi, he's in the back seat going, just, man, this is bringing back some memories. And it was probably the most terrifying experience I had ever had in DCS, because I have a real world F-14 Rio in my back seat walking me through everything. And I'm like, I can't even taxi straight. I think any one of us would have an absolute blast if you came and flew with us one night.
Well, I'm sure if I got on the computer, I'd be all thumbs, like, I'd be all over the place, because, I could still remember, all the mechanics of the real thing, but I haven't played on the computer or done any of that stuff. So I've seen guys with the full cockpit mock-ups and all the inputs with literally the ergonomics are set up.
You've got a couple of them in the squadron.
Okay.
As long as you're right there with me.
I'm getting closer.
Now, Pancake, the guy has an entire room that's it's an F-18 cockpit when you walk in. It's insane.
Yeah, my experience with computer games is it's got a mouse. I got some up and down arrows here, and I got an Alt button and a Q and a T or something. So yeah, some of the stuff I can imagine what goes on with that. It would take me a long time to get that learning curve up to be able to start, competently performing in that. It might be fun.
Yeah, that's the big difference between what you did and what we do is we're all IFR pilots. You've got we don't have the seat of the pants feel that you had in the real thing. So yeah. I think and that's one of the things that I think we've all heard from actual pilots playing the game is they can't feel the jet, so it seems harder for them because
Yeah, well, that's something you definitely notice, and I know we're wrapping things up here, but when you flew the simulator, that they had the full up mock simulator with the F-18, it felt unnatural. It felt very awkward to get in there and do an instrument check ride in a simulator, because you're moving the throttle and you're not hearing anything, you're not feeling anything. It's just, you're just looking at instruments and you're just looking at the video display screen, and it was, quite involved, but still, it just wasn't, once you get used to that environment, everything else becomes, alien or foreign, just unnatural.
Well, Pig, we really appreciate you coming out and talking with us and suffering through all of our questions and whatnot.
No, this has been a good audience. Really good. This has been a good little chat group here. I like it.
Yep. I know we've had Sluggo on here a few times. Maybe we'll bring you back in and sometime in the future and do it again if you're up for it.
Okay. Yeah.
Tex is doing a little preview on his.
Yeah.
his phone
There's Tex's cockpit.
of the cockpit.
John.
Oh, there it is. Look at that. Nice. Got 2 DDIs, an MPCD,
Yeah.
front control.
Yep.
All right.
I'm getting
Moving
there.
all out there. That's looking very much like a Hornet.
I'm getting there. I started before him, but he progressed faster than I did.
Well, I tell you what. In the meantime, since I've got names and faces now, with this little time we've had together, I'm going to start watching and learning a little bit more about what you guys are doing on your little DCS clips that you're doing, Creighton. Your Bones 1775
Yes, sir.
channel, and so now I'll keep an eye out. Now, does everybody have a call sign? The only call sign I see is bloat.
Yep, we've all got them.
We
Okay.
all have them. I'm Bones.
Bones.
Tex.
Okay.
Cyborg.
Cyborg.
I'm Kea.
And let's see, John.
And-
What was your call sign again, John?
Tex.
Tex. All right.
So-
Somebody said something was cut off. Ben, what's yours?
Mine is Merlin.
Merlin. Okay.
That's a fun one.
Very good.
And Chris, I don't know if Chris is here, but Chris is Laser.
Laser.
Yeah, we
Justin
typically let
is dark.
people, when they join, pick their first one, and then some squadrons more so than others will kind of dole out new ones as needed. So
Yeah, that, well, eventually, maybe you've been introduced to the kangaroo court and the,
Yes, they have.
the designation of the call sign. You typically earn your call sign. So I'll let you all guess how I earned Pig. So,
Well, we know it wasn't by landing in a farm full of pigs. So
that had nothing to do with the, well,
Is it an acronym?
Yeah. no, it's not an acronym. It's regarding that barnyard animal. So, well, we can leave that for further discussion. How's that?
Makes you
Sounds
feel
good.
right at home. DCS does have cows you can put in a field.
Just don't bail out. Don't bail out over a pasture full of cows, because there's going to be a bull in there, and he's got your name.
very good. Something to start the second episode on. If you ever would like to come back, we would love to have you back.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. This was a lot of fun. Lots of good questions today too.
They'll get progressively worse, don't worry.
But I tell you, some of the questions you get asked when you're out standing next to an airplane at an air show, just your questions are much more in depth and on point of what really goes on in the the flying community, the mission and all that kind of stuff. So it's not pointing at a pitot tube and asking, "Is that a gun?" That kind of stuff. So you just, that's when you,
Lottie.
that's when I think back to the time I was on a bike and I said, I can't believe I'm getting paid.
It's our Dr. Evil laser beams.
Yes.
Happy thoughts.
I want them on sharks. All right. Well, all right. It's dinner time for me, so I'm gonna get something to eat.
same here.
Well, Thank
Thanks
you again
again.
so much.
Much appreciated.
Yes, thank you again.
All right. Yes. Thank you.
And
Is he driving?
his headset's dying. It happens all the time.
Thanks a lot.
Yep. Bye.
Great to talk to you. Bye-bye.
All right. See you, Creighton.
See you later, Pig. Where the heck is... There it is. Yeah? Oh, let's see. Why am I on push talk? I am not on push talk. Why am I not? Oh, boy. Sorta? Yes, it is. For whatever reason, I don't know why. Settings. Audio. Input. How about now? There we go.